Welcome to the Future Christian Podcast, your source for insights and ideas on how to lead your church into the 21st century. At the Future Christian Podcast, we talk to pastors, authors, and other faith leaders for helpful advice and practical wisdom to help you and your community of faith walk boldly into the future. Now, here's your host, Lauren Richmond Jr.
Welcome to the Future Christian Podcast. Today, Martha Tatarnic welcomes Rob Hurkmans to the show. The Reverend Dr. Robert Hurkmans is a senior pastor at Trinity Anglican Church in Streetsville, Mississauga. He is married to Sally, and they have 4 daughters. Rob recently completed his Doctor of Ministry degree in Leadership Development from Tyndale University. Rob was ordained with Martha Tatarnic 20 years ago in the Diocese of Niagara. One more thing, please take a moment to leave a review on whatever podcast app you're listening on and share this episode with a friend. We hope this episode helps you lead your church into the future.
Welcome to the Future Christian Podcast. I am your host for the summer season, Martha Tatarnic. And today I am so pleased to be having a conversation with a longtime friend and colleague, the Reverend Rob Hurkmans. Fun fact, Rob and I were ordained together 20 years ago this spring, which just seems impossible to believe. We were ordained on a very, very hot day in May with 6 other people, all of whom have since retired. So the 2 of us are the ones that are left standing in full-time ministry after 20 years. Welcome to the podcast, Rob.
Yeah, it is so very nice to be here and to have a conversation with you. And yeah, time flies. Time flies.
We haven't aged a bit, but, somehow time marches on.
Well, we did pull out that old newspaper clipping from the Niagara Anglican that had all of our faces that when they were announcing we were getting ordained, and I think there's been a bit of aging when I looked at that. Yeah, yeah.
Gosh, this conversation is off to a poor start.
I'm speaking of myself more than
no. I mean, we wear our aging with pride, right? Because it comes with wisdom and experience and insight.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I, as I said, know you quite well from working together and being in ministry over the years. But of course, our audience for Future Christian doesn't really know you. So let's start with some opening questions, and we can just give people a little bit of background into who you are, Rob. Okay. Why don't you start by telling us a little bit about the faith context in which you were raised?
Yeah, so I mean, both you and I, Martha, served in the Diocese of Niagara, and I grew up as a farm boy. My dad was a dairy farmer in a small community near Cayuga, Ontario. We attended the local Anglican church for all my life, along with my 3 siblings and my parents. Kind of dragged kicking and screaming to church most Sundays. There was not a lot to do for kids at that church. Sometimes they had a Sunday school program, other times not. But anyways, whether we were downstairs in Sunday school or flipping through the BCP with my parents in the pews on a Sunday morning, that's kind of where my upbringing was as far as a faith community. We were a family of faith. I wouldn't say that we were like, my parents had like a dynamic, vibrant kind of expression of faith, but they were good, solid Anglicans, and we said grace at supper and that kind of stuff. So, that's kind of where it all started. And since then, I served and lived in the Diocese of Niagara for many years, but just in the last 5 or 6 years, I've moved to the Diocese of Toronto, where I'm serving now. Yeah,
you're not too far down the road. In Ontario, but different leadership and different geographical part of the church. Yeah. Okay. So tell us a little bit about your calling. How did it go from being dragged kicking and screaming to Sunday school or not to being somebody who's been in ministry for the past 20 years?
Yeah, I think my passions when I was, let's say, kind of in high school, the passions that really started to grow in me were around things like leadership. I got involved in student leadership in the school. Drama, actually. I really loved drama and participating in drama productions and stuff like that. So, and actually there was this part of me that also wanted to be a teacher. And so all that kind of was there in me, I would say even as a child, those kind of things were in me from the very beginning. For some reason, though, I ended up doing like a 5-year degree in biochemistry at the University of Waterloo.
Is that right? Okay, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and it didn't really seem to fit any of those passions. And yet, when I was at university, some important things kind of happened. Actually, even when I was in late high school, God did something I think really special in my friendship group. I had about 4 or 5 guys who were really close friends, and one of these guys went off to a summer camp one summer, and maybe grade 11, grade 12, and came back and was completely fired up for Jesus. And he, like me, like all of us, had been going to church with our families our whole lives to that point. But now he had come back with a totally different temperature and a totally different passion for his faith. And so that actually kind of led to lots of these conversations. I can remember in the cafeteria, I can remember in the school library, on our spares, we would have our Bibles out. We would and it felt like dominoes in a way. It felt like then another one of my friends kind of just really turned a corner and made that faith their own. And then one after another, it seemed to be just a time when God, in that group of friends that I was part of, was really helping us take all these seeds that maybe our parents had planted by taking us to church all those years. They kind of were activated and started growing, and we started taking a bit more ownership of our own faith journey. So that was a very pivotal time, because then I can remember, like, in that little church that I grew up in, now, there was 5 or 10 of us in the basement, just by our own volition, with a guitar, trying to like sing some songs and trying to figure this thing out kind of on our own. So pretty interesting times. Went off to university, got connected with some campus ministries at that point. Things like, it was called Campus Crusade for Christ at the time. Now it's called Power to Change. University Bible Fellowship was another one I got connected with. And started attending a church. It was like a Baptist church plant that was just off campus. They would send a bus. You could hop on the bus. You could go to church. Loved the teaching there, loved the informality. This pastor was amazing. I still remember him to this day. That church went on to grow and became Creekside Church, which is now in North Waterloo. But this was back when it was meeting in the YMCA in Kitchener. And that was just, I can remember they would sell tapes after the service of his teaching. And I would, like, every Sunday I was there, I would buy like 1 or 2 or 3 of Ken Taylor's tapes, and I would take them home, listen to him. I just thought he was an amazing teacher. And again, I think some of that passion for like drama and being in front of people and speaking and leading and teaching, I started to say, maybe that is kind of how God wired me. Maybe I could do something like that. Maybe. So anyways, a long story short, I ended up going to teachers college, becoming a teacher for a couple of years. And then after I was married, just, discerning things with my wife, we made the decision that, we were being called to at least explore the idea of pursuing ordained ministry. So it's interesting, Martha, but I did not have a passion for the Anglican Church at that point. Really, I'd been raised. The most vibrant churches I'd been a part of were not Anglican. They were like Baptist, kind of free flowing, just low church stuff. I remember I told my parents I want to become a minister or whatever, and they were like, "That's amazing." And I said, "But I'm not interested in the Anglican Church." And they were like, what? But then we actually ended up doing a little tour of Wycliffe College. And that did change my thinking, I would have to say. I would say, okay, maybe there's a way to be Anglican and still be able to exercise the gifts that I feel God's given me and kind of pursue the passions and interests that I have. So that led to me going to Wycliffe College. And I can't remember exactly what the question was, but that's kind of how I ended up slowly over time through some various experiences, kind of feeling ultimately called to ministry.
Wow, that's amazing. I want to put a pin in that piece around, Anglican and then your experience of vibrant, flourishing churches in other denominations, because I do want to come back to that piece. I think that's an interesting part of how you've been a blessing to the Anglican Church, frankly, and why I've really valued our collegial relationship over the years. So definitely want to follow up on that. That's it's so interesting hearing your story, because like there's so many components that are so similar to mine and some parts that are really different. Like I also grew up in a very small rural Anglican church and kind of went kicking and screaming. I mean, I didn't really go kicking and screaming because I just wanted to make my parents happy, but like I wasn't happy going. And I think that there is, for those of us who are raised in the church, I think most of us have a time, somewhere in our teens, maybe early 20s, where there's this conversion process we have to go through as well in terms of laying claim to the faith for ourselves. I would say my experience of that time was quite solitary, because I was really the only young person in my church at that time. And how cool for you that it was sparked by this group of friends that you had.
When you went through that process and kind of made this faith your own, was it strictly within the Anglican tradition, or did you too need to experience faith in another context or something in order to kind of have it really?
Yeah, so that's the other difference between our journeys, is like the Anglican Church was really my formation ground through and through. And I say all the time, like I do feel like that particular combination of Anglican charisms is what allows me to be a follower of Jesus. Whereas I feel like, you kind of bring these other charisms into the Anglican tradition in a really neat way. So
you don't feel a tension between, because I still feel a tension even to this day. I think I felt a tension during that kind of coming to faith moment about, I don't really feel like I fit here. This is kind of more, and that was like a tough tension to navigate. I still feel like in my ministry today, that tension has not gone away. I still struggle between the traditional expression of our church and where I am right now, which is very kind of
let's come back to that, because I really want to dig into that a little bit. And just as a short answer to your question, no, I don't really. I feel lots of tension about life in the church in lots of ways, but for me, like the particular expression of Anglicanism definitely works for me as a follower of Jesus. So why don't you just share with our listeners a little bit about where you serve right now, because you've been there a couple of years and it is a bit of a unique expression in the Anglican Church.
Yeah. So after going through 3 or 4 traditional church settings, I did my curacy at St. Luke's in Burlington. I served at a small church in Port Colborne, Ontario, and then downtown at St. Paul's for a couple of years.
Toronto,
now. I find myself
for our American listeners.
St. Paul's Bloor Street. Yep. Anyways, now I've hung up the robes. I have taken off the collar, I've taken off the stole and the cassock and surplice, and now I find myself at a church called Trinity Streetsville, which they years ago, they even took the word Anglican out of off the sign out front. So anyone who's driving by this place would not say, "Oh, there's the local Anglican church." It's kind of it's a newer building. It's definitely a more, I don't know what to say, almost Pentecostal kind of feeling worship service. There's the architecture doesn't, at least inside, doesn't resemble a typical Anglican church. So it's a very different form of Anglican church. I would even dare say that I don't know that there's really many Anglican churches in the country that look and worship on a Sunday morning like Trinity Streetsville does. I mean, you would probably have a perspective.
No, I think
on
it's
that.
pretty unique, honestly, in our country anyway. Like, it definitely has I think that there are churches that have adopted some of those components in our Anglican tradition, but I think Trinity's kind of led the way for a different expression of Anglicanism.
Yeah, there's quite a story, I think, to how they got here, but I think we lean into, using technology a lot, even on a Sunday morning. Of course, there's the instrumentation is more like a worship band than organ and choir robes and all that kind of thing. And, they use light a lot. So rather than changing a lot of decorations in the church seasonally, it's more like just changing the lighting to kind of produce different colors and effects and feels depending on the season. So yeah, it's a different place to be. I actually really love it. But I'm also aware that I'm in a kind of a different place than some of my Anglican colleagues.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, just rounding out our opening questions, and then we'll dig into some of these things in a little bit more detail. Is there a spiritual practice, Rob, that you're finding particularly meaningful right now?
About a year and a half ago, both my wife and I joined this community. It goes by the name of Habitus. It's a community of spiritual practice where basically you adopt a rule of life and try to live according to that rule with both kind of individual, kind of personal spiritual practices, as well as they put you into a triad, what they call, so a group of three, which weekly you are supposed to gather and meet with your triad for, fellowship and encouragement. And then monthly they have what they call a commons gathering, which is, they'll have some teaching on spiritual practice, or they'll bring in a speaker. So we've been at this now for over a year, and it's challenging for sure you're often not practicing this rule as well as you would like to be practicing it. But I think the most beneficial part of that has been the triad, actually, for me, that I get to meet with these two other guys every week. And we talk about life, but we also talk about our spiritual life and how it's going as we try to live out this rule. So I'd actually encourage people to check it out. It's the guy who created it is named Phil Reinders, and he is a CRC pastor in Oakville. And he's kind of just trying to get this idea, this movement off the ground. But yeah, he's got a pretty good website. It's called Habitus.
I wonder whether I could get him on the podcast. That sounds like it could be an interesting thing to share with our listeners.
He's an amazing thinker and speaker.
All right, well, maybe I can get some follow-up contact information from you, because it does sound like a really powerful initiative in those different components, the rule of life and the community that's holding you to it. Okay, well, let's delve in a little bit more. There were a number of reasons why I wanted to have you on the podcast, Rob. I've been thinking a lot since our 20th anniversary of ordination this past spring about that kind of midpoint in ministry for those of us who have that particular blessing of getting to be have a lifelong career in ministry. I know you said that you taught for a couple of years, but by and large, like we both came into ministry, like pretty green and young, and we have that significant chunk of experience now under our belts, and we also have, God willing, a significant runway of ministry still in front of us. So I thought it would be just interesting in general to talk about that midpoint, but also specifically, I wanted to talk to you because you are a voice in the church, for whom I've always had the utmost respect and admiration. And you've always been someone that I walk away from our conversations and think, oh, well, that gives me a different way of seeing things, or I hadn't thought of that. I think that you just bring so many gifts to ministry. So let's talk first about that midpoint in ministry, and maybe we can look back a little bit together. What has been different about the life of ministry from what you expected or prepared for?
Yeah, thank you for those words, Martha. That's very kind. I think that one of the things that I learned pretty quickly as I moved from being ordained into actual ministry is that I needed to learn to slow down. And I'm not even talking about just like my pace of life. I mean, like slow down in my expectations about how to bring about change in a church or how to experiment with things. I according to the Clifton Strength Finder personality test or whatever, my top two like strengths are ideation, which means I'm an idea person, and activator, which means I like to start things or I like to try things. So I think that's actually pretty true, actually, if I reflect on my life. But I think the downside is that when I would, especially at the beginning, when I came into a situation, I was like, oh, I have an idea. Let's try this. And I would try to get this idea off the ground or try to get that idea off the ground. And then many times, I did do that, and I would push to try to have something happen, and it would happen. And I think my poor congregation kind of went along with it and like was dragged this way and that as the new minister, tried various things. But I think that the learning that eventually came to me by God's grace is that unless I want to be the only one running out there with an idea, I gotta slow down and start to appreciate that these kind of things takes time, and to kind of ram it down people's throats, it doesn't work. I know these things seem obvious to me now as I say it, but I think at the time I probably overwhelmed people with ideas, and I must say, some of those ideas actually, I think, worked out and were successful. Many did not. But I think the point is I didn't bring anybody with me.
Interesting, yeah.
I just kind of raced ahead. And that actually can become a recipe for burnout, because if you got an idea and you say, let's go, and you run ahead and nobody's with you, then who's carrying it? Well, you are. And now it's up to you to kind of keep carrying it. And if you have lots of ideas, then pretty soon you're carrying a whole bunch of things. And that I think is a recipe for burning yourself out. So that was one learning, but I had another, but I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, yeah, I mean, I really relate to that. I think the other piece about burnout in all of that is that, I really had to learn, how to not be just so personally invested in my ideas all by myself too, because then it hurt when other people had ways of making those ideas better, because it felt like I was just way too territorial about my ideas, I think. earlier on. And I think that's sort of another component of running out in front without other people with you.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think related to that for me was I read a lot of like the church growth kind of books and the literature that was out there right around the time when I was in seminary. I can still remember reading in the reading room at Wycliffe College, Rick Warren's Purpose-Driven Church, not Purpose-Driven Life, not Purpose-Driven Life, but Purpose-Driven Church, which was his like first book. And I remember reading it and highlighting, and I have never highlighted a book so much in my life. I was like, yes, absolutely. Yes. I still remember, to this day, I remember like the concentric circles of like, you've got the community and you've got the crowd and the congregation and the core and the committed and the baseball diamond where, you know, it was like class 101 and class 201, class 301. He had just organized it in such a beautiful way, which I'm certain made sense for his context and for the size of his church. And obviously, I think was a very successful model for what he was trying to do. I'm sure lots of lives were changed with it. But that's one example. But I think there was lots of material like that I grabbed onto initially and said, ooh, this will work, or this will work. And I really wanted to kind of implement. And it kind of goes along with my desire to kind of try a new idea and to kind of race out in front of, but it's a little different. I think what I didn't appreciate was an obviously huge difference in context between where this literature was coming from, you know, mega churches in the United States versus where I was, which was like a pastoral sized church in Port Colborne. So that was a learning for me. I think it's, you know, again, it's still one of those struggles, I think, because it's not to say that there isn't stuff to be learned from that. And it's not to say that, oh, you could use that idea and that would be really helpful for helping people grow in their faith. So it's not like just a complete either or, but it certainly is something that I have had to learn more now, is to say, okay, what is called for in this context, in this place? And you can't just lift these ideas from one place and plunk them down in another and expect that they're going to work.
No, for sure. And, you know, I think the other thing too is that, like, there is a component of ministry that is about like throwing noodles at the wall and seeing what sticks. Like, you do have to be willing to try some things and to have some stuff work and some things not work, and then try some more things. And I relate to that, that sense of how, you know, those ideas ideally become more collaborative as we get collaborative and contextual as we get further along in ministry. That's certainly been my experience. I think one of the conversations that clergy often like to reflect on is gaps in our ministry training, like what we didn't learn at seminary that you know, we just weren't prepared for when we actually got out into our churches. Do you think that there's like one or two things that you would have wanted included in your ministry training back in the day?
I mean, the only thing that really came to mind was, first of all, I actually thought my time in seminary was pretty well-rounded, and, you know, there was obviously the core courses one had to take, but in some of the elective courses, you were able to, you know, choose stuff that was more in line with your passions. But I think there was maybe the overarching desire was to create clergy that could bring stability to churches, like to be a stabilizing leader. I think that there was, I can still remember Bishop Ralph, who ordained both of us. I remember, I think when I was going out to my first parish, his advice to me, I still remember, was he said, Rob, just love them. right? Just love them. Just all, and at that time, these were two churches who had just amalgamated, and there was a lot of potential hurt. And his advice is they just need stability. They just need someone to kind of help them heal and just go in and love them. And that's great advice. I'm not faulting that
like
advice
love
at all.
is,
I think that's,
central to what we're about.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, and yet at the same time, I think we know maybe it was because we were just at that tipping point in the life of the church 20 years ago where we're starting to realize that, what, we actually also need leaders who can change things or can lead congregations through change. And if our training is so kind of pastoral, which it needs to be, and so focused on being a stabilizing leader, then actually, how do we destabilize a congregation in a way such that they can actually start to think about new possibilities? And I think some of the literature would say that that's how change happens in churches, is that a leader actually has to come in. And I mean, the best leaders probably balance this perfectly, but on the one hand, they're caring for these people, but on the other hand, there's a challenging presence, like a presence that is trying to destabilize, or trying to point out that this isn't working, or asking really tough questions, and then kind of letting the community try to figure out, well, how do we come up with solutions to that? So, anyways, I think that might be the only thing I would say about our training, is that perhaps they needed to equip us a little more on how to lead change in what we're changing times.
Well, and that's kind of the fundamental reality, right? Is that there's a dishonesty in trying to be a stabilizing presence, because we're just not in a stable time. Like the church is not a stable institution in a stable world at this moment. So, I think that being an effective change maker is a pretty important part of our job.
Yeah, because it's out of instability where, when you're knocked off balance, that's when innovation happens, right? That's kind of when novelty, or not in the bad sense, but new ideas get generated when things are a little off balance, and you're like, oh gosh, what are we going to do here? So, learning how to do that though is definitely a skill. You don't just go in and blow a place up and say, I did my job here, I destabilized, right? No, you're in fact, I've heard an expression called a stable-rupting leader. So it's like, you're stabilizing, but you're also disrupting at the same time. You're a stable rupter.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the goal.
Yeah, no, that's really good. Okay, so let's go back to that pin that we put into your background and where you serve now in ministry, and that kind of conflict or sense of tension that you feel with our Anglican tradition. Because that is one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on the pod, because I really admire how you kind of negotiate that balance. I don't think that this label is all that descriptive, but you're sort of an evangelical Anglican. And I don't love it, because I think we're all supposed to be evangelical. But
sure.
But what I mean by that is to say that, you bring a real confessional element to the Anglican tradition. You always lead with absolute clarity about Jesus being at the center of everything that we do. I think you have a real gift for Christian apologetics, and you've also excelled at leading congregations that don't get super hung up in following all of the traditions of our church, whether it's different musical styles or leaving the vestments at the door, or some of the other things that you noted about your current context. So there aren't a lot of churches like the one that you're at now, and I think that your voice is somewhat unique in our Anglican Church in Canada. So can you just say a little bit more about that tension, as well as how you've managed to make that tension work for the past 20 years?
Yeah, so this might not be the answer that you are looking for or expecting, but I actually don't feel that tension at all. And I have to say, I have never felt like any bishop or other clergy have been watching me, making sure that they agree with what I'm saying, or agree with what we're doing as a church. I've never felt anything but hey, we actually appreciate the diversity of different ways of being a Christian in the ecosystem that is our diocese. It actually makes me wonder if there isn't I don't know, I know there's been, maybe there's been changes over these last 20 years that some evangelicals would say, I don't agree with that change, or I don't agree with that move that's being made by our leadership or by our diocese. And then their next thought is, therefore I cannot possibly operate in this space, right? I can no longer lead, right? Because they've gone and done this, or they've gone and said that, or they've published this or whatever. And I would say, yeah, maybe I also didn't agree over the last 2 decades with every, decision that was made by our bishops and leaders, but it never made me feel like now I don't fit here, or now I can't keep preaching this way, or I can't keep leading this way. And so I often wonder if there isn't in some people, and this is maybe a bad, some kind of a martyr complex or something, like that they're looking for that ditch to die in, and that they actually I've always had great relationships with my bishops. And I actually have a hard time relating to the person who would say, I'm an evangelical and I find it really hard to operate in this, culture we have in the church. I've just never felt that. I don't know if that makes any sense to you, but it's just not been a problem.
No, I really appreciate that answer. I think that's really insightful. You did name some sense of tension at the beginning of our conversation. Was that kind of more around the liturgical practices of the church? Is that kind of where you feel more of a rub?
Yeah, the tension isn't theological. I mean, the liturgy of the church is, I think, deeply theologically rich, and I love it. In many ways, very personally as a devotional tool. It's amazing. So the tension I have felt there has not been about this isn't a case of my evangelical identity. It's been more about how are we, what kind of a church are we inviting people into? Are we, stuck in the past in our forms and rituals and liturgies, and then in a way we're not able to really do cross-cultural mission with people because we're really asking them, hey, come into this world we've created and become like us. So that's more, but that's not about the theology of evangelicalism. It's more about
yeah. I mean, you asked me at the outset of our conversation whether I feel some of that tension, and I think for me, that our Anglican parameters have been a source of creativity for me. I find that sort of having these forms and then being able to play within them and imagine how music can be different, or our setting can be different, or our imagery can be different within the liturgical parameters. I have found that like very creatively rich over the years. And I'm guessing you must have some of that experience as well, just given like your track record in ministry. Like you have done really creative things within Anglican parameters over the years. Like, is that a component of it too?
Looking back, I do not feel like I have done much creative in that regard. I think most of the creative things that I have done have been outside of the Sunday morning experience, or it's been a creative project in the community, or maybe a fresh expression of church, or a creative way of organizing your staff team, or something like that. But looking back, I don't feel like I was creative in the liturgy very much. That wasn't my gift, for one, to come up with creative forms of liturgy. I think what is the tension is, okay, like right now I find myself in a place that is so different that it's almost like, and I don't want this to sound the wrong way, but I almost feel like scales have fallen off my eyes. And that sounds horrible, because it makes anyone who's still doing a liturgical kind of form of Anglicanism, which just about everybody is, it makes the sound lesser than. That's not what I'm saying at all. But I'm actually saying that I don't know that I can go back at this point. I feel like I've gotten to this place and experienced a way of doing church and of living out our Anglican faith, which seems to be accepted by our diocese and even, in some ways protected. And it works. I think it does work. I think it makes sense. And I really believe that, this is missions. This is like missionary work 101, right? The idea is, when you're trying to reach people of a different culture or different language or different customs, you don't expect them to come to you, and you don't expect them to do the cross-cultural work. You don't expect them to say, let me learn your language. Let me learn this calendar. Let me learn what these symbols and vestments, and let me learn what, these hymns and collects. And like, I'm probably going overboard here, but there's a sense, I think, still within Anglicanism, even the way that I operated for most of my ministry career, where people were walking into a place and there's just so many triggers and barriers in there that I know that there's some people who would say, oh, isn't that beautiful? It's so rich, it's so deep. This is what I've been looking for my whole life. And there will always be some people like that. And there will always be Anglicans that say, the young people love the liturgy. The millennials are coming back to the liturgy. The next generation is hungry for liturgy. And there are some, there's no doubt. But I think they're overstating their case. I just don't think that's where most people are. I think most people do find, when they walk into our churches, is a lot of stuff there. It's foreign. And rather, missionary work is what you do. You say, we're going to learn your language. We're going to learn your customs. We're going to learn the styles and the cultural aspects of who you are. And then we're going to find a way to incarnate the gospel, or kind of communicate the gospel in a language and in a way that is going to make sense for you, is going to help you be able to understand this. And I feel like what we're doing here right now is more of an expression of that than my previous ministry. Personally speaking, though, I just have to state this. I find the liturgy, my BCP sitting right here, I find the liturgy deeply rich and formative to this day. So it's not a personal like or dislike. I find it deeply rich, but I'm just not certain how it fits in with those who are seeking the church in the first place.
Well, and I think that the ministry context in which you serve is such an amazing example of God kind of gathering up a lot of the threads of your life into a ministry context for which you are just extremely well suited. Like, I think when you were announced as the new lead pastor of Streetsville, like everybody went, yeah, that makes sense. Like Rob should be there, right? Like you're doing, like God is doing a really great thing in you in that church.
Yeah, and I am definitely, though, the recipient of, I think, other people's hard work in that regard. Like I was talking about disruptive leadership, right? So I think everybody in Canada in the Anglican Church knows that, 25 years ago, Harold Percy was that kind of disruptive, stabilizing, disruptive leader that came in and, with the support of his bishop, really was able to do something very different. And it wasn't easy. And there certainly were people who didn't like it and all that. But, I don't know if I even have like the courage to do half the things that he did. I'm not sure that the times call for it, frankly. But yeah, I don't for a second. I've only been here 3.5 years. The Trinity Streetsville has, what it is, has very little to do with me at this point. I'm actually kind of just being evangelized by it, in a sense, as I serve here.
That's a good example of God's grace as well. Absolutely. So like 20 years in, as we're just kind of reflecting on the present at the moment, like how do you stay fresh in ministry? What keeps you renewed, hopeful? What gets you up each day?
I still do love getting up to come to work every day. I really, really do. I think part of what makes that happen for me is I really love the people that I work with. I love the staff team that we've built here at Trinity. I think they're all like such talented people who bring gifts that I just don't have at all. I mean, going back to how I started, many of us in our first church, we were the ones who kind of knew the most about everything. We knew the most about tech. We knew the most about music. We knew the most about, preaching. We knew the most about pastoral care. We knew the most about the finances, whatever, right? I guess I'm just right now, I'm in a situation where I'm just deeply, deeply aware that everybody around me is so extraordinarily talented at their jobs that my role as a leader now is something totally, totally different. So I think that is one of the things that energizes me the most, is actually coming in and getting to work alongside these folks. If I'm honest.
Yeah. I can definitely co-sign that. Like I think one of the most exciting things in ministry is like the many gifts, one spirit, right? Like that you really do have this incredible opportunity to behold the gifts of God working in other people, and to see how that makes amazing things happen.
Yeah. So you asked the question, what kind of things sustain me in ministry? And I have to say that when I first got here to Trinity, one of the big gifts that was given to me is that our bishop set us up with a coach. And this coach met with us for an hour every week. And my coach, that lasted for 2 years. And I can just, if I stop and I think of the sheer amount of time I spent talking to that person about what I was going through and what I was learning and what I was struggling with, what was going good, what was not going not so good, that was like a huge piece of, I think, helping me get off to a great start here at Trinity. It was a real gift. I actually wanted to get it to keep on going, but I think 2 years was the most they were willing to pay for. But I was just recently thinking I should again enlist the help of a coach, because it's just so good to have somebody who's like maybe just a step or two removed from your ministry situation, who can kind of look at it with fresh eyes, look at it in another perspective. She was an amazing coach because over those 2 years, she got to know all the players, all the people. She got to know all the staff and what was going going on. And then every week she would say, how did this go? And how did that go? And how is so-and-so doing? And on like that. So that I think having that person in your life to check in with you regularly is key for going strong in this work we do.
Yeah. And, I've had those coaching relationships at a couple of key junctures, like in starting a new ministry, but I also had a coach at a really critical juncture when I'd been here at St. George's for quite a while. And that was incredibly helpful too, just in terms of getting out of any ruts that I was sort of finding myself in, and just rethinking the dynamics and the organization and that kind of thing. So I would highly recommend those coaching relationships as well. Mm-hmm. When we got together with the parts of our ordination cohort that we were able to round up to have a little anniversary celebration in the spring, I was really interested to hear your thoughts about the future of the church and what kind of leadership model is needed for the church today. You said to our group that your picture about that leadership model has really shifted in the last number of years, based on that 20 years of experience. Can you share with our audience today just a little bit about that shifting picture?
Yeah, I think if I remember when we spoke, I told you that when we first began this life of the priesthood and in church ministry, the leadership model that really stuck in my mind and that I kind of operated for a long time was the idea of the visionary leader. I think that's maybe what and at least at the time when I thought of visionary leader, or when I read books on visionary leadership, it was this idea that there was a certain kind of skill that a leader could develop that would allow them to see, what the future held, to kind of be the lead sled dog in the pack of dogs, and you had the best view. You could see ahead better than other people behind you could see. And so as a visionary leader, you kind of saw the future and you called people to follow me. I know where I'm going. This is where so you would cast a picture of the future, cast your vision and communicate your vision, and then get people to follow you into that vision. And I should say, I still do think we need visionary leaders. It's not like that way of leading is completely obsolete. But I think that now I realize that most of the problems and challenges that the church faces are so complex and so multifaceted that no one person could possibly have the ability or the vision or the skills or the know-how to be able to say, hey, follow me. I have this privileged view of where we go from here. Just kind of trust me and come along. And so I think that now I have kind of moved in my own thinking from this idea of a visionary leader to more of a collaborative model of leadership. On my best days, I try to make sure that I'm involving as many people as possible in leadership decisions. I did some doctoral work just recently, and one of the kind of names I gave to this way of leading was shared leadership. Kind of trying to invite others into leadership. And there's fake ways of doing this sometimes. I mean, you can be like I'm sharing leadership, but really all you're doing is you're just being a backseat driver, right? You're just saying like, hey, turn here, or, slow down, you're going too fast. And so I think I've made some of those mistakes too, where I'm trying to empower people to lead, and but I'm not really doing that. I'm kind of like disempowering them, and I'm disabling them or directing them. And that's not great. But at its best, it's really, I don't know, just leading as a community, leading as a team in a collaborative way, I think is the only way we can really kind of sort through some of the problems that we're facing these days. That's the first thing I would say, the one of the big shifts. I mean, you probably noticed that too.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember you're saying at lunch that the smartest person in the room is the room. And boy, that's a good place to get to, I think.
Yeah.
And it's not like unrelated to where we started off in terms of like learning to slow down, right? Like I think doing that deep listening, that discernment around context and collaboration in terms of how we figure out next steps going forward. Like I think that those are all very much related to what you're saying about that shifting leadership model.
Yeah. And I would add to that is as I think about how do we expand leadership, I think we also have to have a conversation about lay leadership. Because to me, the future of the church has got to be very heavily weighted toward lay leadership. I just think with the decline that we're all witnessing in the Anglican Church of Canada, and also realizing that, my goodness, the gifts we need to do the work we need to do in the setting that we're in are not gifts that most of us are learning in seminary. They're not we have to tap into just, I think, way more gifts and talents than clergy can generally bring to the table. So I think as we extend leadership, as we bring others into leadership, I think we have to be thinking, not just clerical leadership, but beyond that.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that is a theology of the body of Christ and of the church that has a lot more scriptural weight to back it up than this notion that it's just one person out in front with a collar on who has the relevant gifts to lead a church. Like even the word lay leadership kind of suggests that like a lay person suggests that people don't have the expertise that we have, right? Like we're the ones with the training and they're lay people without the expertise. But like that's a false way of defining it too, right? Like we need all of the various components of expertise in order to be the church and in order to serve.
Yeah, there would have been a time not long before I got here where there were 3 clergy here. And yeah, there was other people on the staff team who were not ordained, but as it stands right now, I'm the only ordained person on the team, which does have some drawbacks from time to time, I will say. But I think that the benefits outweigh those drawbacks because we've been able to kind of hire instead people with just way different kind of talents than clergy would bring.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, really fill out the skill sets and navigate the uncertain waters.
Yeah. It's so sometimes I think we need to think when we are building a team, not just skills, but also like personality as well. And like, I remember we did this like assessment thing with our team a couple of years ago where we tried to, again, figure out where our strengths and our personalities landed us. And this may not be incredibly surprising to you, but I was like very, very low when it came to empathy. I always thought I was like empathetic or whatever, but we learned a lot about pastoral care and how to listen and engage people in crisis moments with empathy. But anyways, that's just not my natural thing. But our worship leader, Libby, her like number one thing was empathy. Like it was literally like opposite ends of the spectrum. And it made me think like, yeah, so it's not just that she has a different skill set than I do, which she does, right? She's musical in a way that I'll never be. But she also has gifts and a personality type that is very different than mine. So that when we sit around a table and we're thinking through things together, it's good that she's just built differently that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, those complementary gifts, complementary personalities. That's amazing. Yeah. Well, thank you, Rob, for I know that we could probably just talk for a couple more hours about all of the things that we wish we had known 20 years ago and the things that we've learned along the way. But why don't we take a pause right now and we can come back for a couple of rapid fire closing questions and then we'll go from there.
Okay, sounds good.
Welcome back to the Future Christian podcast. And we are going to wrap up today's episode with Rob Hurkmans with a couple of rapid fire questions. Rob, are you ready?
Let's do it.
Okay. Well, if you could be Pope for a day, what would that day look like? What would be on your agenda for 24 hours?
Oh man, that's not quite what I thought the question. Like for a whole day, what would you do all day long? I just thought of one thing that I thought, you know what, I would really like to do, but maybe I should have had a bigger vision than this. But anyways, here's the thing. Years ago, here at Trinity, the former pastor created this thing called the Institute for Evangelism, and it was like this kind of brand new way to help people grow in their comfortability with sharing the gospel with other people. Anyways, I think given our conversation we've had today and where we're at, I would love to create something and call it an Institute of Leadership Development or an Institute of Lay Leadership Development or something like that. Because I think for me, I think that's where it's at today, is building up new leaders and especially lay leaders. I think that's key to the future of the church. So that's where I'd put my energy if that's the decision I would make as Pope.
Well, I don't think that that's lacking in vision at all. I think that that's a great way to spend your day as Pope.
Okay, good.
That's a good answer. And I should have said at the beginning of the rapid fire questions is that you can take these questions as seriously as you want or not.
Okay.
So, there's no wrong answer.
Okay.
All right, let's continue on here. So, who would be a theologian or historical Christian figure who you would want to meet, have supper with, bring back to life for a conversation?
I mean, most of these people are way out of my league, but just this past Sunday, I referenced somebody in my sermon that I've referenced a few times, and that was this preacher by the name of Dr. Martin Lloyd-Jones. And the reason I find him fascinating is he lived for, I think he was born in 1901. He died in the early 1980s, but he was a medical doctor. So he began his career as a medical doctor and then transitioned later into being a minister. He, for 30 years, preached at the Westminster Chapel in London. He was a great orator, he rolled his R's. He was Welsh. He had, but this idea that he was both a doctor, so he had this science background, which I do, and he was also a pastor and a preacher, which we do. That I thought that's an interesting mix, and that'd be just wonderful to see how that played out in his own ministry.
Okay, good answer. And one that we haven't had before. Sometimes we have repeat answers on Future Christian, but I have not heard that answer before. That's good. I have to look him up. What will history remember from our current time and place?
Well, there's no doubt about it that the current moment we occupy, Martha, is a time of decline in the Anglican Church as we know it, and kind of the end of maybe a period of Christendom as we know it. And so we get to actually witness this happening, whether it's by 2040, as Neil Elliott says, or not. But there's going to be some big changes that we're seeing, and I can't help but think that's what people are going to look back at this period, not only to say, hey, it was during that period of time that the kind of institutional church, like Anglican Church, really, really lost a lot of members. But hopefully it's also a time where they look back and they say, and as a result of those changes they saw, there were these beautiful and innovative ideas that came out of the ashes that planted seeds for the future church.
Yeah, I think that that's what I would hope for as well. I know, I led a study in our church about the history of St. George's, which is over 230 years old. And it was so interesting looking at the boom times of St. George's and realizing that the seeds of decline were being sown in the midst of these busting, booming times. And so I imagine like the seeds of renewal are being planted
a good way of putting
within our time of decline.
I like that.
So,
yeah.
What are your hopes for the future of Christianity? I imagine this answer might be connected to the previous answer.
Yeah, I think a renewed investment in lay leadership. I think the future of the church is going to be less clerical. And so I hope that, again, our church leadership kind of gets ahead of that and starts to kind of create and train and form Christian leaders who can, just create different expressions of church in their neighborhoods, in their coffee shops, in their libraries, in their, gymnasiums, in their living rooms, whatever, again, it's maybe not as heavily hierarchical or clerical, but just, kind of a new underground movement of lay leadership that plants those seeds of renewal that we were just talking about. I think that's the way it has to happen. So that's my hope.
That's your hope. That's good. Well, as I said, I feel like I could chat with you for a couple more hours, and probably our listeners would love to hear more from you as well. So where can people go to find out more about you?
Yeah, I think you would just go to our website, trinitystreetsville.org, or to our YouTube channel, which is, you just search for Trinity Streetsville there. I did mention that I just completed a thesis on some of the stuff we talked about today. We did reference some of it. And so if you Google the leadership development road trip, I think it'll come up. It's probably a long read in the Tyndale repository of theses, but that would be a place to find out more.
Okay, well, thank you so much for our conversation today, Rob. We always end our podcast with a word of peace. So may God's peace be with you.
And also with you.
Thanks for joining us on the Future Christian Podcast. To learn more about Lauren or the podcast, visit future-christian.com. One more thing before you go. Do us a favor and subscribe to the podcast. And if you're feeling especially generous, leave a review. It really helps us get the word out to more people about the podcast. The Future Christian Podcast is a production of Torn Curtain Arts and Resonate Media. Our episodes were mixed by Danny Burton, and the production support is provided by Paul Romig-Levitt. Thanks, and go in peace.